Hello and welcome to another video by Rick Miracle Me in my series Freemasonry and Satanism. Freemasonry. If you read the Morals and Dogma and other books about the secret society, you seem to see something about King Solomon's temple, Lucifer, Isis, Osiris, Ra, Moloch, Mithras, some other kind of world. So hence my title for this series, Freemasonry and Satanism, appears to be appropriate. And of course, Satanism, a lot of people don't believe in the devil or Satan or Lucifer or even gray aliens or reptilian beings, even though these things are mentioned in the Bible, or many people have described abductions. And then, of course, we have channeling with Cryon, Abraham, Seth, Buddha. It's all kinds of entities that people are channeling or talking through in this other world, Palladians, and so much more. So I thought I'd do another review of another one of the books I have on channeling, the Seth material with Jane Roberts. I did the last video, part 1, series 125, on volume 2, because that's the book I had at the time. So I ordered some more Jane Roberts and her husband Robert Butts channeling Seth, and Robert, her husband, does the dictation, puts everything into paper. So that was part 1 on this one. Just a small portion out of the book. So if you're interested in this material, go buy the books. We don't want to be doing audio books here. I read the books, I throw in my own 2 cents, have a conversation, and hopefully if you're watching this video, I'm sharing the conversation with you. Good or bad, it's not what I'm trying to preach. I just want to learn and understand what these people are putting in these books, because these books are consumption for people. Good or bad. So I figured out about 50% of the books written were out there trying to tell people good stuff or warn people about bad stuff. And then, of course, the other 50% are trying to create some kind of propaganda and deceive people. So you got to be careful when you read a book. Is it trying to tell you something sincerely for your own benefit, or is it trying to deceive you for its benefit? Service to self or service to others? Just food for thought. So this is series 125, part 2. Ironically, it's backwards. I used volume 2 for part 1 and volume 1 for part 2. But I'll be making more. I ordered 2 more books in the mail from the Seth series, and I have 2 more here to show you in a minute during this opening on this video. So The Unknown Reality, Volume 1 of a Seth book by Jane Roberts, author of Seth Speaks. I think I ordered that book. Notes and introduction by Robert Butts. Anyways, apparently Jane Roberts and her husband were using a Ouija board back in like 1963. And they started communicating with this other being. And I've heard of some very dangerous activities using a Ouija board. People actually becoming possessed, even to the point of having to be taken away in straitjackets to mental institutions. So be careful when embarking on this kind of material. Don't open the door to beings who apparently want to get in and see through your eyes. You have your spiritual being in your body, and you get to live it. But if you give it away or you let other beings in your body, they can take over. As bizarre as that sounds. So I'll start reading from this after my opening. I'll look at a few more books. You know, Alice Bailey, I made a book review on this book or two, 19, and we'll be revisiting many of these books I show you right now. But it talks about the occult and meditation, different tools you use to communicate with the other world. And Alice Bailey was one of the people who inherited Helena Blavatsky's Theosophist Society, which also had the Lucifer Publishing Company and the Lucifer magazine. Basically the platform for all the New Age material. Another one I went over a book review many years ago, which I'll revisit this. So when I'm up to 130, I think, in my series, with almost 400 videos or more, 500 hours in the Freemasonry and Satanism series. So if you find these things interesting and insightful, interesting, bewildering, go to my website, rickmiracle.com, and look on the left-hand side of your screen, and it should be a little link there to a page listing all my series, so you can pick and choose what you want to watch. Plus, I went on there and changed to use another tool on YouTube that you can, my computer just went blank, but there's a tool where you can watch the videos in a new platform. As soon as I fix that, I'll mention what it is. They link a bunch. Playlist. There you go. Sometimes it takes a moment for the brain to think. I didn't know YouTube had those playlists. So when I finish up more of these channeling videos, there'll be a playlist, channeled material, book reviews by Rick Miracle. But I made a bunch of other playlists there, like the Blue Lodge Handbook, or Morals and Dogma, or the Encyclopedia Judaica. So if you're watching one of those videos and you're going by the playlist, you can just click a button and see the next one and the next one. Some of them I got 15, 20 videos. That'd be 30 or 40 hours. Oh my. So, psychic self-defense. Think about that. Written when? Let's look at the inside here. First published in 1930. So back in 1930, Dion Fortune deemed it necessary to write a book, Psychic Self-Defense. So when you go into this other world, apparently it might behoove you to be a little bit knowledgeable to protect yourself, because it can be very dangerous. Imagine going into the woods and running into a mountain lion or a large grizzly bear. Not a good idea. So psychic self-defense says if you're going to get out there and travel in that other realm, leave your body or whatever, invite entities into your own body, beware. As aware, or maybe even more aware, than the mountain lion or the grizzly bear. Just saying. What to believe. That was series 19. And of course I have series 10, Psychic Warrior, David Morehouse, one of the men that the government recruited to be in remote viewing, leave their bodies and travel elsewhere and come back to their bodies and make drawings and describe to the government agencies what they saw. And a lot of corporations and other entities are into this these days. You can go sign up for a school for a week. It's quite expensive. And learn remote viewing. That was David Morehouse. And then I've been going over this one, remote viewing, Tim Rifat. And this is series number 6. So back there in 2013, when I started this series, I had already read 100+ books and hundreds of magazines, watched thousands of videos, tens of thousands of press releases, printed them out, and the comments made by people. In other words, I was paying attention to what the heck was going on in the world and what had happened, history, religion, secret societies, the occult, and so much more, archaeology, current events. Alright, so then I was also doing videos on the Book of Enoch. I think I have one more video to make. I've made quite a few already. Series number 116. Again, I need to make a Book of Enoch playlist. Masonry Beyond the Light. Look at the devil picture on the front of this book by a very well-known author and insider, was formerly in the occult, and he tells all. That would have been series number 117. And of course I've been making videos, and I'll continue reading this material and making more. I certainly have my work cut out for me. The Secret Doctrine. The Secret Doctrine. Helena Blavatsky. The one who started the, I don't know if there's any pictures of her here, the Theosophist Society, Lucifer Publishing Company, Lucifer Magazine, and so much more that you just have to read it. I just flipped over to page 239, and I highlighted this material here. I'll read it to just give you a sample. The deity, the ever-invisible presence, says the Zohar, that's one of those Jewish books, manifests itself through the 10 Sephiroth, which are its radiating witnesses. The deity is like the sea, from which outflows a stream called wisdom, and waters which fall into a lake named intelligence. From the basin, like 7 channels inside the 7 Sephiroth, for 10 equals 7, the decade contains 4, unites the 3 binaries. The 10 Sephiroth correspond to the limbs of man. When I framed Adam Kidman, the Elohim are made to say. So the Adam Kidman is supposed to be like the first shape of a man, huge up in the sky. The Elohim are some kind of fallen angels. The spirit of the eternal shot out of his body. So when the fallen angels, or the Elohim, made this Adam Kidman, the spirit of the eternal shot out of his body like a sheet of lightning, and radiated at once on the billows of the 7 millions of skies. And my 10 splendors were his limbs, but neither the head nor the shoulders of Adam Kidman can be seen. Before we read in the Safra Dhyana Nuth, the Book of the Concealed Mystery. So I suppose you can see plenty more to read here. I've been making videos on Edgar Cayce, Story of Jesus. I have other books by Edgar Cayce. I'll continue reading other books too and making videos, and have a whole playlist on Edgar Cayce material under the series 112 on Freemasonry and Satanism. And again, Freemasonry and Satanism, so I'm tying the secret society material world with Satanism, with the invisible reality world. I've been making videos on 120. major trends in Jewish mysticism. So I'm tying together the Kabbalah, mysticism, channeled material, Zionism, the Freemasonry material, secret societies, witchcraft, Rosicrucian, all these cults, secret societies. They don't all have hugely different philosophies. It's apparently a lot of older historic philosophy or religions, pagans with many gods, versus Jesus arriving on earth a couple thousand years ago, preaching the one God, and the commandment that he added was we are to love one another. And obviously that's not what people on the world are doing today. More Seth books I have. The Further Education Oversoul of Oversoul 7. So this is a novel here. So she wrote some interesting novels before she started getting into the channeled material. Dialogues of the Soul and the Mortal Self in Time. Jane Roberts. Like I said, I ordered 2 more books. And then, of course, I've been this other channeling person, Ester Hicks, doing Abraham. Me and a friend of mine watch a lot of Ester Hicks videos. And I do have the book, and I made a video on it, and I'll probably try to get some of her other material. Series 126. And I have another book I haven't read yet on channeling. A Journalist and 6 Trance Channelers, and Messages from the Other Side. So it'll be interesting for me to read this book after I continue making videos by the channeled material and the authors that I have. And the Guide to Zionism, what's with that? This New Age, New World Order ruling the world from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And the Guide to Zionism clearly spells out they've been going along with this program a couple hundred years plus, and organized in groups since 1880. And it seems to me clear that World War I, World War II, and 9/11, and so much more chaos and anarchy was planned and executed as part of this Guide to Zionism. And of course, I've been making a video on this book, a couple. Messengers of Deceptions, Series 121. And Jacques Vallée is no amateur when it comes to UFO aliens and science and physics and all that. And his philosophy seems to be the same as mine, that these invisible beings mentioned in the Bible and so much more are the ones that we're seeing in the alien UFO propaganda, material, people who have been abducted and witnessing things. And of course, I made one video, maybe, I think I made 1 or 2, but I'll be making more on these books. Series 122 on the Ra material. So somebody was channeling Ra. What was his name? Don Elkins, Carla Ruckert, James Allen McCarthy. And when we look at the Ra material, we see even in the book here is Egyptian hieroglyphics. And then of course I was doing the Cryon material in 123. And that would have been, what was this guy's name who was channeling Cryon? Lee Carroll. So I thought it'd behoove me in my pursuit of trying to figure out what the heck is going on in the world. And when I say us, the people who watch my videos, to get into these authors and mediums and psychics who channel entities from the other side. What are they saying? Is the story all the same? Are there different stories? and it's become a very fascinating investigation. I think it all has everything to do with what's going on in our world right now. The New Age and New World Order, and deceiving politicians and leaders around the world, deceiving news on TV, newspapers, magazines, radio. We're not getting the truth, and that's putting it mildly. It seems like there's a big plot for some Hunger Games type world, and it's been going on quite a while, and it's all verifiable. Even government legislation, activities, symbols, satanic rituals, almost everywhere for quite a while. You'd have to almost be blind not to see it. So with all that said, let me read from the Unknown Reality, Jane Roberts channeling Seth. Now this can seem a little confusing, the information in this book, The Unknown Reality, channeled by Seth to Jane Roberts, who learned how to communicate with the beyond, the invisible reality, while playing with a Ouija board. And apparently the other entity on the other side asked for permission to take over her body so he could speak when she went into a trance. 1963 to 73 and 83. I think almost 20 years. This book was published 1977. So she started in 63, 73. So 13, 14 years later. I'm not trying to do an audio book, but I do like to read from a couple pages and have my commentary to clear it up from my mind, as well as those people who are watching my video, because as I said, this can be a little confusing. I did look at the front of this book, and I decided to go read page 138, section 690, Sex, the Gods, the Ego, Christ, God the Father, and the history of Christianity. So I jumped right into this stuff. And apparently, many years before Jane Roberts got into this material, or into channeling, period, she wrote a poem. Thought it was interesting, so I'll read it. Summer is winter. Today is tomorrow, and present past. Nothing exists, and everything will last. There is no beginning, there was no end. The depth to fall, no height to ascend. No depth to fall, no height to ascend. There is only this moment, this flicker of light, that illuminates nothing, but oh so bright. For we are the spark that flutters in space, consuming an eternity of a moment's grace. For today is tomorrow, present and past, nothing exists, everything will last. So apparently she wrote this in 1952. She started channeling in 1963, and she was only 23 years old. So even in this immature work, which she produced 11 years before she was to initiate the Seth material, her mystical nature was asserting its innate knowledge. Alright, so there's more opening material here, but I'm just going to start reading and discuss what I read and see what you think. So they have something like measurements of consciousness, like a cup of water or a gallon of gas, a measurement. So they have something called CUs, units of consciousness are literally in every place and time at once. Units of consciousness. So is everything behind me and every word just filled up with units of consciousness? Like a pool would be filled up with gallons of water. They possess the greater adaptability and a profound inborn propensity for organization of all kinds. They act as individuals, and yet each carries within it a knowledge of all the other kinds of activity that is happening in any other given unit or groups of units. So are there units of consciousness everywhere? Remember, this is channeled material by some entity calling himself Seth. As there are insides to apples, so think of the ordinary moment as an apple. In usual experience, you hold that apple in your hand or eat it. Using this analogy, however, the apple itself, at the moment, would contain infinite vibrations of itself within itself. These CUs, units of consciousness, therefore can operate even within time as you understand it in ways that are most difficult to understand. Time not only goes backward and forward, but inward and outward. I am still using your idea of time here to some degree. Later in this book, I hope to lead you beyond it entirely. But in the terms of which I am speaking, it is the inward and outward direction of time that give you a universe that seems to be fairly permanent. Yet it is also being created. This inward and outward thrust allows for several important conditions that are necessary for the establishment of relativity, separate, stable universe systems. Such a system may seem like a closed one from any viewpoint within itself, yet this inward and outward thrusting condition effectively sets up the boundaries and uniqueness of each universal system, while allowing for a constant give and take of energy among them. No energy is ever lost. It may seem to disappear from one system, but if so, it will emerge in another. The inward and outward thrust is not perceived, is largely responsible for what you think of as an ordinary consecutive time. It is of the utmost and supreme importance, of course, that these CUs, units of consciousness, are literally indestructible. They can take any form, organize themselves in any kind of time behavior hyphen, and seem to form a reality that is completely dependent upon its apparent form and structure, yet disappearing through one of the physicist's black holes. For example, through structure and form would seem to be annihilated and time drastically altered. There would be an emergence at the other end where the whole package of a universe, having been closed in a black hole, would be reopened. There is a constant surge in your universe of new energy through infinite minute sources. The sources are the CUs themselves, the units of consciousness. In their own way, and using an analogy, now in certain respects, at least the CUs operate as minute but extremely potent black holes and white holes as they are presently determined by the physicists. The CUs, following that analogy, serve as a source point or holes through which energy falls into your system or is attracted to it, and in doing so forms it. The experience of forward time and the appearance of physical matter in space and time and all the phenomenon world results. As CUs, units of consciousness, leave your system, time is broken down. Its effects are no longer experienced as consecutive, and matter becomes more and more plastic until its mental elements become apparent. New CUs enter and leave your system constantly. Then, within the system in mass, this is a little bit bizarre, I understand, but if we pay attention, some of it will make more sense. All right, back to the book. Within the system, in mass, so I guess the mass of the whole system, however, through their great and small organizational structures, the CUs are aware of everything happening. So the units of consciousness are aware of everything happening. Remember, this is channeled material from some entity named Seth on the other side in the invisible reality. So what is it he is saying? And if you listen to enough of this, you start to pick up on the theme of the conversation. At least I did. Not only on the top of the moment, but within it all of its probabilities. So each of us have probabilities, what can happen in the very next second of our existence. I could turn this video off, or I could continue talking. I could jump up, go to the left, go to the right. Probabilities in our lives, in this planet. Now this means that biologically the cell is aware of all its probable variations, while in your time and structure it holds its unique position as a part, say, of any given organ in your body. So he's saying there's cells in your body have consciousness, whether they're in your toenail or in your heart or in your brain, wherever. In greater terms, the cell is a huge physical universe, orbiting an invisible CU. So a cell is orbiting a unit of consciousness. So would that mean if I have billions of cells in my body, I have billions of units of consciousness in my body? Are all those cells aware? I know they all do their job, keeping this body alive and healthy. And in your terms, the CU will always be invisible, beyond the smallest phenomenon that you can perceive with any kind of instrument. To some extent, however, its activity can be indirectly apprehended through its effects upon the phenomenon that you can perceive. The EE units mentioned earlier, I'm not sure what the EE units are, represent the stage of emergence, the threshold point that practically activates the CUs, units of consciousness, in your terms. It is vital that you understand this inward and outward thrust of time. However, and realize that from this flows the consecutive appearance of the moment. The thrusting gives dimensions to time that so far you have not even begun to realize. The thrusting gives dimensions to time that so far you have not even begun to realize. It's funny how missing one word when you're reading changes a sentence. Again, you live on the surface of the moments, with no understanding of the unrecognized and unofficial realities that lie beneath. All of this, once more, is tied in with your accepted neurological recognition of certain messages over others, your mental prejudice that effectively blinds you to other quite valid biological communications that are indeed present all of the time. So I know to meditate and communicate to the other world, the invisible reality, whether it's beings or the Akashic records, you have to quiet your conscious self, your thinking. And we're all thinking thoughts every second, every minute, every hour, every day. And they apparently have a veil that prohibits us from communicating with the other world, with our other mind, because you do have two parts to your brain. One is the one that operates in this time, and the right side of your brain operates on some super high frequency time. It communicates through us through emotions and other activities. I'm trying to tell you something about the greater reality of your species. Yet to do so with any justice, I must divest you, if possible, of certain concepts about the beginning of time or man's early history. To start with, however, we will for a while lean on the old terminology while hoping to gradually leave it behind. Give us a moment and rest your hand. So when Seth is speaking to Jane, Seth will tell Rob, who's taking the notes, to rest a moment. The CUs form all systems simultaneously. So the units of consciousness form all systems everywhere simultaneously. Having formed yours, and from their energy diversifying themselves into physical forms, they were aware of all of the probable vibrations from any given biological strain. So I suspect all the units of consciousness that are in me are probably those cells and atoms and molecules and units of consciousness that creates me, or a rabbit or a horse, frog. Are all those units of consciousness fundamentally the same in everything? Just like to think when I'm reading this stuff and try to understand what this being Seth is saying. There was never any straight line of developments as... So he's talking about evolution now. There was never any straight line of developments as, say, from reptiles to mammal, ape to man. So Seth is denying this evolution thing. Instead, there were great, still continuing, infinitely rich parallel explosions of life forms and patterns in as many directions as possible. So with these units of consciousness in all directions, all over the planet, they kind of knew what they were going to be, or decided what they were going to be from the many different probabilities. There were animal men and men animals, using your terms, that shared both time and space for many centuries. This is, as you all well know, a physical system in time. Here cells die and are replaced, knowing their own indestructibility. The CUs, units of consciousness, within them simply change form, retaining, however, the identity of all the cells that they have been. While the cell dies physically, its inviolate nature is not betrayed. It is simply no longer physical. So now in quantum physics, they say that a particle becomes a material particle and then switches to a wave, back to a particle, back to a wave. In and out of this material existence. Particle, wave, everything all the time. That kind of death, so when the particle turns into a wave, that kind of death is then natural in one way or another within your system. I will be speaking here from many viewpoints, and later I will discuss in full your ideas of mortality. Here, however, let me state that all life is cooperative. It also knows it exists beyond its form. So even plant life is cooperative, and plant life even knows it exists beyond its form as a plant. So if everything is made up of units of consciousness, when the plant dies, the unit of consciousness still exists. No energy is ever lost. The experience of your species involves a certain kind of consciousness development, highly vital. The experience of your species. This necessitated a certain kind of specialization, a certain long-term identification with form. Now remember, I've been reading about the Kabbalah, mysticism, even Christian religion, and psychic research, UFO aliens, and so many other things, remote viewing. So it just behooves me, in my research, to look at all different explanations of reality from all different sources. Cellular structure maintains brilliant effectiveness in the body's present reality, but knows itself free of it. Man's particular kind of consciousness fiercely identified with the body. This was a necessity to focus energy towards physical manipulation. To some important extent, the same applies to animals. The cell might gladly die, but the specifically oriented man and animal consciousness would not so willingly let go. The cell is individual and struggles for rightful survival. Yet its time is limited, and the body's survival is dependent upon the cell's innate wisdom. The cell must die finally for the body to survive, and only by dying can the cell further its own development, and therefore ensure its own greater survival. So the cell knows how to die. That to die is to live. Apparently Jane delivered that material in the most forceful manner. Man's consciousness, and to some extent that of animals, is more specifically identified with form, however. In order to develop its own kind of individualized awareness, man had to consciously ignore for a while its own place within the structure of the earth. His experience of time would seem to be the experience of his identity. His consciousness would not seem to flow into his body before birth and out of it after death. He would forget that there was a time to die. He would forget that death meant a new life. A natural message had to replace the old knowledge. To flow into his body before death and out of it after death. His consciousness would not seem. So we don't, after we die, we don't even know that we died. And of course, when you enter a newborn infant, a baby when you're born, some say infants remember their past lives, but they're trained out of it. Interesting. In the body, certain cells kill others, and in doing so, the body's living integrity is maintained. The cells do each other this service. So I guess there are cells in your body that kill any entities that they regard as an enemy. In the exterior world, certain animals kill others. You had for centuries, then speaking in your limited terms, a situation in which men and animals were both hunters and prey. In those misty eras, from your standpoint, these activities were carried on with the deepest, most sacred comprehension. Again, the slain animal knew that it would later look out through its slayer's eyes, attaining a newer, different kind of consciousness. The man, the slayer, understood the great sense of harmony that existed even in the slaying, and knew that in turn the physical material of his body would be used by the earth to replenish and vegetable and animal kingdom. By the earth to replenish and replenish the vegetable and animal kingdoms. Some days I read better and some I don't. Then again, it might be some of the material I'm reading or the temperature in the room. It's warm outside here in the mountains of North Carolina. All right, back to the Seth material channeled by Jane Roberts. Even when you lost sight, as you knew you would, of those deep connections, they would continue to operate until, in its own way, man's consciousness could rediscover the knowledge and put it to use, deliberately and willfully, thereby bringing that consciousness to flower. In your terms, this would represent a great leap, for the egotistically aware individual would fully comprehend unconscious knowledge and act on his own and out of choice. He would become a conscious co-creator. Obviously, this has not yet occurred. So that is interesting, because a lot of the channeled information by other people, including Ester Hicks, talk about, and Seth, and many others, I keep reading this over and over again, that we are co-creators. I'm looking for the common denominators when I read this stuff. Some of it gets complex, and some of it makes a little bit more sense. I told you that you presently perceive only the surface of the moment. So you also perceive only one line of the species development. Yet even within your system there are hints of other probable realities that also coexist. The dolphins are a case in point. In your line of probability, they are oddities, yet even now you recognize their great brain capacity, and to some dim extent glimpse the range of their own communication. At one time on your earth, in the way you look at time, there were many such species, water dwellers with brain capacities as good as or better than your own. Your legends of mermaids, for example, though highly romanticized, do indeed hint at one such species development. There were several species smaller than the dolphins, but generally the same structurally. Their intelligence was indisputable, and old myths of sea gods arose from such species. There is even now an extremely rich emotional life on the part of the dolphins, to which you are relatively blind. And more than this, on their part, a greater recognition of species than you yourselves have. The dolphins possess a strange sense of personal loyalty and an intimate family pattern, along with a highly developed individual and group recognition and behavior. They cooperate with each other, in other words. Well, if they're doing that, they're doing better than we humans in many cases. They go out of their way to help other species, and yet they do not take pets. There were also, however, many varieties of water-dwelling mammals, some combining the human with the fish, though roughly along the lines of a combination chimpanzee-fish type. These were small creatures who moved with amazing rapidity and could emerge onto the land for days at a time. The other probabilities, so I guess when things evolve in this world, humans, dogs, rats, birds, those are just cellulars combining into different things, some kind of intelligence from beyond, and they're calling that probabilities. In other probabilities, water-dwelling mammals predominate. So in other dimensions of reality, they farm the land as you farm the water, and are only now learning how to operate upon the land for any moment of time, as you are only now learning how to manipulate below the water. So here you have it, some entity named Seth, back in 1963, 73, 83, 20 years, was communicating to Jane Roberts, who wrote many books. And this is some of the material. The physical universe serves then as a threshold for probabilities. And all possible species find their greatest fulfillment within that system, each of them neurologically tuned into their own reality and their own time. So the body itself, as it presently exists, is innately equipped with other neurological responses that to you would seem to be biologically invisible. So our bodies are connected to invisible units of consciousness we call the spirit or soul. I'm just thinking here. Nevertheless, your consciousness and your beliefs are what direct this neurological recognition. At birth, and before structured learning processes begin, you are far freer in that regard. Continuing on, you could walk into yesterday as well as tomorrow at that point of birth. If you could walk, and indeed your perception brings you events both in and out of time sequence. Responses to out-of-time events do not bring the infant recognition, approval, or action. However, it immediately begins to learn to accept certain neurological pulses which bring results, and not others, so neurological patterns are easily learned, early learned. Having fun today reading. This can be a frightening process, though it is accompanied by reassurances. The infant sees, out of context, both present and future without discrimination, and I am speaking of images physically perceived. So it makes you wonder, when a baby is born, they have to learn to be like we think as adults. You just wonder if they have a greater capacity to perceive. You ever thought about that? For me, it's interesting reading this, because when I do read about mysticism, the Kabbalah, Helena Blavatsky's Theophist Society, Isis Unveiled, Secret Doctrine, Barbara Manischek, the Palladians, and all this other research I do, I have to kind of remember this being's description of reality. Trying to find the common denominators. Moving on, page 130. Nightmares on the part of children often operate as biological and psychic releases, during which blurred, out-of-time perceptions emerge explosively. Events perceived that cannot be reacted to effectively in the face of parental conditioning. I did pre-read all this stuff, as I always do before I start making a video. The body, then, is indeed far more wondrous living mechanism than you realize. It is the body's own precognition that allows the child to develop, to speak, and walk and grow. In the same manner, the species, as you think of it as one level aware of its own probabilities, in the same manner, the species, as you think of it as it isn't me. Some of these word combinations are tough. In the same manner, the species, as you think of it as a one level aware of its own probabilities and future lines of development. The child learning to walk may fall and hurt itself, yet it does learn. In the same way, the race makes errors, and yet in response to its greater knowledge, it continues to seek out those areas of its own probable fulfillment. Alright, some notes here by Rob. Jane's trance had been profound. She was amazed to learn that it had lasted over 2 hours of channeling. Actually, she had run through the whole session without a break. It's still a different kind of trance, she said, and once you're in it, it's better to stay there. But it's exhilarating in ways that I can't explain. It's wild, she continued, but I know that all of this is leading to an alternative man, probable man, and parallel man. So there's some notes on the bottom here. Sometimes I highlight the notes. I read them. If I think they're important, then I highlight them so I can read them and make a video. So, Rob's notes. In general, given the nature of CUs, units of consciousness, Seth postulated basic units of consciousness that make up all realities. Closed systems cannot exist. Basically, however, no system is closed. Energy flows freely from one to another, or rather permeates each. It is only the camouflage physical structure that gives the impression of closed systems, and the law of inertia does not apply. It appears to be a reality only within your own framework and because of your limited focus. Then for some early quotes from Seth about his own ability to move among certain systems of reality. So apparently Seth could move among systems of reality. We humans on Earth today, 2017, are living in a system of reality. One probability. Are there other probabilities? Seth in the 512th session in chapter 1 of Seth Speaks. I believe I ordered the book Seth Speaks. Now at times I will be using the term camouflage, referring to the physical world in which the outer ego relates. For a physical form is one of the camouflage that reality adopts. I've always said the spiritual reality is the true reality. This temporary life that we live in these bodies is not the true reality. It is but one probability, I guess, of or where our souls or spirits can go, maybe units of consciousness. And maybe there are many probabilities, different other realities out there. This little note fits in here for 2 reasons. Jane's pause and Seth's discussion of our kind of time. Jane reports that when she pauses for Seth during a delivery, she can sense the whole concept of the subject being discussed. Which is interesting when I do a little bit of psychic stuff. Using maybe a pendulum, trying to get an answer for something. For example, I can ask the pendulum, show me a yes, and it's turning to the right. Thank you, and goes back to ready, show me a left, and it goes to the... So I can ask yes or no questions, quality of water, whatever. But my point to this is, sometimes when I ask a question, I've been doing this so long, I know the answer before it starts turning. And it's starting to get stronger. I notice I get a glimpse of the answer before I get the answer. In not just using a pendulum, but in everyday life. So they say if you practice and practice, your psychic abilities will improve. Intuitive ability. For me, the intuitive ability is even the choice of books and the sequence that I make these videos. It's not something I pre-plan out front. Sometimes it takes me a few days to know where I'm going on the next book and the next video. But after I look at it in the present, look back, I think to myself, wow, that was a pretty interesting way you did that. This topic, back to this topic, back to this topic. And some people might think it's all planned. That would hardly be true. There's so much material out there. I can't even keep up with the current events. The press releases, the ones today, I just read you a couple titles here that it's just too much. A little bit of sidebar here. China, here we go. China outraged by 1.4 billion planned U.S. weapons sold to Taiwan. Global cyber attack may have aimed at havoc instead of blackmail. How Britain initiated both world wars. Nick Kollerstrom. Like, I can't even make videos on this stuff. I'm so busy with the book reviews. But this stuff is crazy. Germany legalizes same-sex marriage. Johannamism with its roots in the occult of Dagon. Russia warns it will treat U.S. coalition jets. Eric Holder joins the anti-Trump resistance. Benjamin Friedman speaks on Zionism. I put that in my videos. Bush Hammer Project and the 9/11 deception. The Bushes, George Bush's Hammer Project? Please go look that up. Oh my God, before 9/11? I guess they knew the Middle East was going to be taken down and Russia was going to fall and all that. They borrowed billions of dollars, and they were, when Russia was falling, they were making all kinds of investments in oil and everything else. These insiders have the leverage over the rest of us. We don't have a chance. Israel boasts of unimaginable power and future wars. Israel is boasting of unimaginable powers and future wars. Look at all these probabilities, and I'm reading about probabilities here. UN chiefs, U.S. will be replaced if it disengages. Zionism versus Bolshevism. How to create your own, this here. A famous black American author tortured with. Anyways, you get the point. I follow more than just doing these book reviews. I watch videos. I read magazines. I just got the recent issue of Nexus. June 2017. And the article that I am reading, oh my goodness. Show you how much I've read so far. Please go look this up. You're not going to believe it. Government agencies invest in vaccines for profit. Is it ethical for governments to regulate their own products? Catherine O'Driscoll, February 2017. Go look up this article. You saw how much I read here, and it's pretty convincing. But can you imagine if you were one of these big corporations and you had the patents to... Got some more to read. To many of these diseases, plagues, viruses, and it was billions of dollars of sales every year from countries all over the world. And, you know, business was getting a little slow. It seems to me that, knowing the human nature that we're all living in, talking about probabilities, that they would release some of these diseases, viruses, plagues, so to scare the rest of us, the rest of the countries, so that they could continue to have billions of dollars of years in sales of these patented vaccines. And they patent the viruses also. And apparently they're doing all this in the name of biological warfare. Instead of nuclear bombs or other type of bombs, they have future plans for this stuff. According to this article in Nexus Magazine that just came out. And Nexus Magazine just announced that they were starting to sell magazines in the United States again. So they were celebrating getting back into the USA market, which apparently they were, according to rumors and things that friends told me, they had to pull out of the USA market. They're in Australia because of the mind control articles in those magazines. So I read a little bit from the Seth material. I have more to read, and then maybe we'll look at something else on this video. Alright, session 689. That last one was session 688. That's the session I just read. And now I got a shorter one here, 689. Slightly different topics. So if that one was befuddling you a little bit, don't worry about it. Unless you start reading a little bit more and watch other videos that I've made and other people's videos and start to look at the channeled material, if you're curious. And it's quite popular. You don't know how many people are listening to all these channeled material on YouTube and elsewhere, like Ester Hicks with Abraham. What is that name? Chiron? Seth? So many more. The raw material. I have to make another video on that. And many others. I am going to get to the bottom of this. Okay, now to some extent, the development of consciousness, as you understand it, follows the development of the gods through the ages. And in those stories appear the guises that man might have taken, as well as those that he did. All animal gods hint at various experiments and species in which consciousness took different forms, in which the birth of egotistical awareness, as you know it, tried several areas of exploration. There were, for example, different versions of man-animal comprehension and activity. So again, I'm reminding us, me and anybody who watches this video, that this is Seth from the Invisible Reality, channeling material, who is a psychic through Jane Roberts, who learned how to do that by using the Ouija board. All of which, as you saw that one book I showed in the opening, Psychic Self-Defense, Dion Fortune, I advise highly, be careful. Got to be careful what you're getting into. Be strong in your faith. Know the difference between right and wrong, God and Jesus, or demons and Lucifer or Satan. How do you protect yourself? From approximately 50 million to 30 million years ago, there were innumerable species that would now seem to you to be mutated forms. The distinction between man-animal and animal-man was not as clear as it is in your time. In some ways, consciousness is more mobile, less centered, and more experimental. That earlier report, that early mixture, would later be remembered as myths of gods in animal form. So we see a lot of hieroglyphics and other beasts etched in stone, even Indian totem poles, all over the world. So what's that got to do with this? Such a variety existed long before your paleontologists realized that it did. There were many tool-making animal species, some predating man's tool-making faculty. Consciousness knows all of the probabilities of fulfillment open to it. So is consciousness God? Is it made up of all those little units of consciousness? Just me asking questions and thinking. Each species carries in its individual and mass psyche of blueprints of such probability actualities. They have discovered recently that your DNA is only part of what makes up the person. It could not function without some kind of unit of consciousness behind the DNA. So it alone doesn't build the human body. Per some recent research and discoveries, it is the spiritual realm involved with the DNA in this reality that brings about a human like me or you. Or animals, or trees, bugs, bees. These blueprints are biologically valid, that is, they allow the cell's precognitive knowledge upon which present behavior is based. This applies not only individuality, so that the cell knows its future pattern. For example, in the same way, an entire species will unconsciously have the knowledge of its own ideal fulfillment in its overall world environment. It's interesting to watch animals, birds, etc. They appear to be aware, looking around, paying attention to the environment. As specified, ego consciousness grew. These inner patterns, native to the psyche of any species, turned into concept, mental images, intuitive projections that were all meant to give conscious direction. The gods served then as stimulators of development. Seemingly outside of the self, they were meant to lead the self into its greatest area of fulfillment. The God image would change as consciousness did. The various God concepts that have fallen by the wayside, so to speak, represent areas of development that were not chosen in your terms. But they are still latent. The totem pole, for example, is a remnant from an era where there were much greater communication between man and with the animals, when in fact men went to the animals to learn, and from them first acquired knowledge of herbs and corrective medical behavior. So why is it that animals, like dogs or cats if you watch them, know to eat grass so that they can toss their cookies, throw up, to keep themselves healthy? Or, you know, they lick their fur and they get a lot of fur in their stomach, a fur ball. So they instinctively know that. Nobody taught the cat or dog to do that. And who taught a bird after it was a baby and grew up for its first year and then mated with another bird and built a nest? Who taught the bird how to build a nest? And if you watch them, they really act like a family unit. Even bears and other animals, they instinctively know all this programming. I mean, how many women today, and men, know how to take care of a birth of a baby? They don't. They have to rush to the hospital. They don't have a clue. So I guess the animals got one up on us. They're still connected to this unit of consciousness. Historically, it seems to you that mankind was born from an animal's undifferentiated kind of consciousness into egotistical self-awareness. Instead, many types of consciousness existed in the period of which I am speaking. The animals chose to develop their own kind of consciousness, as you chose your own. Animal awareness may seem undifferentiated to you. It is, however, highly specific, poised in the moment, but so completely that your terms past and future are largely meaningless. So I suppose the animals are living more in the now, and we the people should be doing that, but everybody lives in the past or lives in the future instead of living in the now. The specific concentration, however, results in an exquisite focus. Ego consciousness lost part of that focus in comparison. The totem pole dates back to the time when men and animals understood each other before that point of departure. Physical species that existed and flourished in those epochs then became probable to you, for they did not develop in your own system but became extinct. Their living relics exist in the God concepts that embodied them. In one way or another, all mythology contains descriptions of other species existing on Earth at various forms. In various forms. This includes stories of fairies and giants, for example. Mythology tells you about archaeology of your race physically as well as psychically. There were then smaller and larger species of men, with varying consciousness connecting with the rest of nature. The larger experiments involved the production of a species that would be a part of the earth and yet became aware co-creators of it. There were innumerable considerations, innumerable experiments, with size, brain capacity, neurological structure, with a kind of consciousness flexible enough to change with its environment, and also vigorous enough to explore and alter the environment. The emerging consciousness had to have, latently at least, the capacity to become aware of world conditions. When man knew no more than a simple tribal life, his brain already had the capacity to learn anything it must, for one day it would be responsible for the life of a planet. Such leeway left room for many probabilities and for many eras. But the developing consciousness had to be free to make its own judgments. It would not be programmed any more than necessary by instinct. It was, however, biologically locked into the earthly existence and so meant to understand its own natural heritage. It could not separate itself too much then or become overly arrogant. Its survival was so linked to the rest of nature that it would of necessity always have to return to that base. In response to an inborn impetus for its own greatest fulfillment, and will automatically change directions in answer to its own experiments and experiences. There are great sweeping changes in religious concepts abroad in your times. I found this interesting. There are great sweeping changes in religious concepts abroad in your time. So this whole conversation we've been having in this video by this channeled entity, trying to describe the units of consciousness, man's creation and relation to animals and existence on planet Earth. And now it's bringing something into focus on this section about there are great sweeping changes in religious concepts abroad in your times, and these represent man's innate knowledge. So that's knowledge that was like sleeping and dormant within us. His consciousness, his psyche, is projecting greater images of his own probable fulfillment, and these are seen as his changing concepts of God. Well, that was interesting to read that last part there. So we all know about the New Age and the New World Order, and apparently this changing concept of God and projecting greater images of his own probable fulfillment. And there are great sweeping changes in religious concepts abroad in your times, and these represent man's innate knowledge. So I'm wondering here, when you talk about Satan or Lucifer bad, assuming this side is bad, two poles, bad and good, and Jesus or God or other religious people are good. What is Seth? Good or bad? What he's teaching here? I ask myself when I read this. To be honest, I haven't formed an opinion yet. And when I do, it'll have to be something concrete. But I just thought it was a little suspicious to see what I just saw at the end of this section. So far in this volume 1, I've read 2 sections. I think I've got 2 more here that I highlighted to read. So let me see what I'm going to say next in this video to check the time. Well, it looks like I can squeeze in another 30 minutes, since I average usually 2 hours or a little less on a video. So I thought I'd read from another session with Seth. Having trouble today talking. Channeling through Jane Roberts on this Friday, 4:10 in the afternoon, June 30th. Alright, so it's been interesting reading about this units of consciousness and Seth's story about the evolution and creation and actions of mankind, animals, etc. So here we go. To be effective within your system of reality, consciousness must, of course, deal with specializations. So our system of reality, so apparently there are other systems of reality. Beneath these, so to speak, the CUs, the units of consciousness, are aware of the different kinds of consciousness of which they are part. By their nature, certain kinds of organization, behavior, and experimentation exclude other quite as valid but different approaches. The CUs, in their freewheeling nature, beneath all matter, are acquainted with all such organizations, so that some of the lessons learned by one species are indeed transferred to another. So it's the units of consciousness that make up a species, and when one species learns things, apparently another species, those units of consciousness, the information can be transferred to another one. One particular experiment in consciousness may be pursued by one species, for example, and that knowledge given to another or transferred to another, where it appears as instinct. Here it is to be used as a basis for a different kind of behavior, exploration, and experiment. I have said that evolution does not exist as you think, in any kind of one-line or ape-to-man time sequence. No other species developed in that manner either. Instead, they are parallel developments. Your time perceptions show you but one slice of the whole cake, for instance. In thinking of terms of consecutive time, however, evolution does not march from the past into the future. Instead, the species is precognitively aware of those changes it wants to make, and from the future it alters the present state of the chromosomes and genes. So inside our bodies, our units of consciousness, or the spiritual reality, it is aware of changes that need to be made to the chromosomes and genes from the future. So if it looks into the future and there's an undesired result, does it back up and make a change before it comes to that result? If everything is now, past, present, and future, then does it try to make the now always right, or by choice? Just exercising my right to think and speculate. To bring about in a probable future the specific changes it desires, both above and below your usual conscious focus, then time is experienced in an entirely different fashion and is consistently manipulated as physically you manipulate matter. These CUs, units of consciousness, forming the structure later in its entirety, from all the atoms, molecules, and cells and organs that make up your world. Land changes and alterations of species are conditions brought about in line with the overall patterns that involve all species or land, water masses at any given time. There is a great organization of consciousness involved on such occasions, sometimes creative catalysms, in which, again, from its own precognitive information, nature brings about those situations best suited to its needs. So behind this reality, the whole world that we all know now in 2017, is there a spiritual, godlike consciousness that perceives the changes that need to be taken, to be made, in order to secure a desired now future? Such biological precognition is firmly based in the chromosomes and genes and reflected in the cells. As mentioned earlier, the present corporal structure of any physical body, of any kind, is maintained only because of the cell's innate precognitive ability. To the self, the future, of course, is not experienced as future. It is simply one of the emerging conditions of an experienced now. An experienced now. Emerging conditions of an experienced now. The cells particularly felt now. So do our cells, our units of consciousness, see it as the now? Is everything the now? Yesterday's gone. The future's not here. It's always the now. I notice that in some of these teachings. Includes then what you would think of as the past and future, as simple conditions of nowness. They maintain the body's structure in your poised time only by manipulating themselves in the rich meeting of probabilities. So everything is probabilities. There is a constant give and take of communication between the cell as you know it in the present time and the cell as it was in the past or will be. So if this was done in 1977 from a interdimensional being naming himself Seth to Jane Roberts in this psychic, this medium, it's kind of fascinating information. Again, I'm not trying to preach it as gospel or truth. This is what Seth is saying, and I'm keeping an open mind and reading it. The cell's comprehension leaps its present form. The reality, the physical reality of a given cell, is the focused result of its existence before and after itself in time. And from its knowledge of past and future, it receives its present structure. From its knowledge of past and future. So it sees the future looking this way. Whatever I can see what I'm looking at. As easy as it looks this way and sees the past. Time travel? Is that really possible? The cell's comprehension leaps its present form. The reality and physical reality of a given cell is the focused result of its existence before and after itself in time. From its knowledge of past and future, it receives the present structure. In a larger sense, the same applies to any given species. You are yourselves in time, then because of the selves that exist before and after you in time. On a cellular basis, this is true. In psychic terms, it is also true. Your thoughts and feelings are quite as real as your cells. They also form organizations. Your desires go out from you in time, but in all directions. Your desires go out from you in time. Well, that's interesting. So what you think about, you bring about, and your desires go out from you in time, and if they make the now from looking in the future, that's what Ester Hicks teaches with Abraham and many of these other channeled materials. I have to underline that one. I didn't underline it to catch it before. Just trying to find the common denominators here. On the one hand, as a species, your present forms your future. But even in deeper terms, your precognitive awareness of your own possibilities from the future helps to form the present that will then make the probable future of your reality. In physical terms, you may want a new city. So in physical terms, you may want a new city. I guess this is an example here. So now you begin urban renewal. Architects draw plans that first were dreams, of course. Inside their minds, preparations are begun, buildings are torn down. In very simple terms, the architect's dream can be called a precognitive event, inserted from a probable future in the present. The physical planning carried out is in line with the envisioned future and brings it about. In greater terms, the race has plans for itself. So on a spiritual level, on a physical level, our bodies and spirits, it has plans for itself, like you would plan a new city. Only these are based on a much more vaster comprehension of the probabilities issue, abilities and conditions involved. A people's recognized God represents such a psychic plan, projected out as an idea. It will be followed by physical organizations, structures meant on a different level to help achieve such a spiritual evolution. Because you dwell in time, however, the God image will also reflect the state of your consciousness as it is, as well as point towards the future state desired. The God concept will operate as the psychic and spiritual blueprint, just like the architect's plan, only at a different level. Each species has within it such blueprints of varying degrees. And these are important, for they carry within them the idealized probabilities. They are valid, again, psychically and biologically. They will serve as biological patterns in the cells, as well as the psychic stimuli in terms of consciousness. So anyways, it says here, moving on, the spiritual and the biological cannot be separated. Their purposes and reality merge. I will have much more to say concerning this later in the book. For now, simply let me mention that any gods appearing among you must always be of your time, while expressing ideas and concepts that must shoot beyond your time into the future and serve as a psychic stimuli strong enough to affect future changes. Any god appearing among us? When in historic terms the race was in the process of adopting a necessary artificial separation of itself from the rest of nature, when it needed to be assured of its abilities to do so, when it took upon itself the task of a particular kind of specialization and individual focus, it needed a religion that would assure it of its abilities. So again, it's getting back into this religion thing here, which I will underline this for my future reference, to see what this channeled entity is going to say next. The male-female tendencies at that time became psychically alienated from each other. The differences were exaggerated. The ancient mother goddess concept became unconscious. The male, purposely forgetting the great natural aggressive thrust at birth, took physical aggression and force as his prerogative, for this came to represent the quality of ego consciousness in the need to psychically manipulate its environment. Well, that sounds kind of new agey to me. While it, our ego consciousness, recognized its deep oneness with the earth and all creatures, it could not at the same time develop those abilities of specialization in its own particular unique focus. The growth of separate tribal cultures, for example, and later of nations, could emerge only through a sense of separation and a kind of alienation. This, however, allowed for a diversity that could not be otherwise be achieved under the accepted conditions. The seemingly local Jewish God, here we go, Yahweh Jehovah, ended up in one way or another by destroying the Roman Empire, and in doing so brought about a complete reorganization of planetary culture. Well, this is kind of interesting to see what Seth is saying. Christ, as he is known historically, physically, represent man's probabilities. His theories and teachings could be interpreted in many ways. They stood for kernels that men could sow as he wished. Because of Christ, there was an England and an industrial revolution. The male aspect of Christ were the ones that Western civilization emphasized. Other portions of his teachings did not follow the main line of Christian thought and were blurred. The church ignored Christ's physical birth, for example, and made his mother an immaculate virgin, which meant that the consciousness of the species would for a longer time ignore its relationship with nature and its feminine aspect. Well, that's an explanation. That's interesting. I am speaking now of mainline Western civilization. God the Father would be recognized and Earth Goddess forgotten. So it's kind of tainted here, trying to bring about more acceptance of the New Age material. I find that a little suspicious, but I'll keep reading. There would be feudal lords, therefore, not seeresses, females, period. Men would believe he did indeed have dominion over the earth as a separate species, for the God the Father had given it to him. Rising ego consciousness then would have its religious reasons for domination and control. The Pope became God, and the Father personified, but that God had indeed changed from the old Jewish Jehovah. Christ, historically speaking, had altered that concept enough so that at least God the Father was not quite as capricious as Jehovah, changing in mood or behavior capricious. Growing ego consciousness could not run rampant over nature. On the other hand, holy wars and ignorance would keep the populace down, the population down. The Church, however, the Roman Catholic Church, still had a repository of religious ideas and concepts that served as a bank of probabilities from which the race could draw. The religious ideas served as social organization, much needed, and many other of the monks managed to preserve the old manuscripts and knowledge underground. Aha, so this is information regarding the rising of the New Age. I didn't kind of catch this when I read it the first time. Those who were allied with the religious principles now mainly survived and brought forth communities and descendants who were protected. Psychic and religious ideas then, despite many drawbacks, served as a method of species organization. They are far more important in terms of evolution than is recognized. Religious concepts from the beginning kept tribes together, providing social structures and ensured physical survival and the protection that made descendants more probable. Wow, I missed that. I read it, but I didn't really see. That's why these book reviews and reading books and making videos benefits me hugely, is I get to read it a couple times and try to formulate a picture of what's trying to be told here. The story. So we got a little bit more to read here, and I'll end this video. These are some notes here. So it says here, she said the buried material about Christ and mainline Christian thought had to be with occult, meaning hidden teachings, and the Essenes, who were one of the four major Jewish sects known to exist in the Holy Land. Of the four major Jewish sects known to exist in the Holy Land in the 1st century. Jane added that she might have read speculative matter involving Christ, the occult, and the Essenes. Probably, we thought, many secret teachings have been attributed to Christ. So Jane is not in a trance right now, and she's just speculating that in her past she had read about some of this stuff. Then we wondered whether Seth had referred to aspects of Christ's philosophy that were truly buried, quite unknown today. Almost always I refrain from interrupting the flow of session material with questions, but now I wished I'd asked Seth about that. Jane and I liked the idea that from the earliest times, religious forces had been operating in the development of the species, this seemed to be a very sensible concept, and quite obvious once it was mentioned. And I firmly believe that the invisible reality does interact with the physical reality in positive and negative ways. Obviously, if evil men are practicing witchcraft and sorcery for their own personal gain, whether it's perverted behavior or greed or whatever, that's why I do a lot of this material on the mysticism and the Kabbalah and all these secret societies. It just might behoove the rest of us to learn about this other world and why they want to destroy and eliminate Christianity from the minds of the human race. Just saying. Alright, resume the reading now. Now realize that for now I am emphasizing your Western civilization. American democracy arises directly from the birth of Protestantism. For example, in a new kind of venture, Luther, as is much responsible for the United States of America as George Washington is. So usually it was the Protestants, Christians, who were strong in creating the United States of America. FYI. Other democratic societies had existed in the past, but in them democracy was still based on one religious precept, though it might be expressed in different ways, as for example in the Greek city-states in the 6th and 5th centuries BC. The Holy Roman Empire united a civilization under one religious idea. But the true brotherhood of men can be expressed only by allowing the freedom of man's thought through the banner of cooperation. And only this will result in the fulfillment of the species, with the developments of consciousness that in your terms were latent from the beginning. I am telling you that the so-called evolution and religion are closely connected. This is Seth speaking through Jane Roberts. Further developments in your concepts will lead to greater activation in portions of the brain now not nearly utilized. So they are talking about the Great Awakening or Ascension, and a lot of these New Age websites and teachings and books are talking about greater brain or physical psychic capabilities. And these in turn will trigger expansions in both psychic and biological terms. The growth of ideas space-wise was a prerequisite. Men on one side of the planet had to know what men were thinking on the other side. All of this presupposed spatial manipulation. Religious incentives always serve to stimulate men's spatial curiosity. Many of the species that share your world bear within themselves latent abilities that are even now developing. Men and animals will again meet upon the earth with the old understanding in a yet new situation. There is no closed systems, and in the deep biological orders, each species know what other is doing, and its place in the overall scheme that has been chosen by each. You are perceived in one way or another by all these inhabitants of earth you may consider beneath you. You are perceived in one way or another by all these inhabitants on earth you may consider beneath you. So all these animals we think are beneath us perceive us. Probable man is emerging now, and also in relationship with his entire natural environment, and in cooperation is a main force. You are cooperating with nature whether you or not realize it, for you are a part of it. Well, that was interesting. Sometimes a little confusing, sometimes a little startling, But nevertheless, it was an entity, if Jane is telling the truth, speaking through her, called Seth, telling us that information in those 3 sessions I just read about. What do you think? And I'll be reading more channeled material. And maybe the common denominator will rear its head and we'll understand. We'll see. Good or bad. Thank you for watching my video. Rick Miracle reporting.